Younger groups, I will say you cannot do, 45 minutes of conversation or an hour of conversation or even 30 minutes of conversation without putting in some sort of fun game. We are going to talk a little bit about virtual stuff too, because younger kids especially, they want to do something that's fun. But if you do a game the whole time, then you're not getting that conversation practice that's needed either. So let's go ahead and talk about that. First things first, I want to talk about research on ASD and conversation skills. So in a published article, in the National Autism Indicators Report, they looked at transitioning into young adulthood. And I love this study because it talks specifically about conversational skills. Here on the left, it's talking about the disconnection. We oftentimes hear about students or young adults with ASD feeling disconnected. And what they found is basically the more successful that somebody was or young adults were with conversing, the less disconnected they felt. So as their conversation ability increased, their feeling of connection also increased and their disconnection decreased. If you look at the chart on the right side that says social isolation, as their conversation ability increased, their feeling socially isolated decreased. So those things socially make sense. The more you're able to converse, the less socially isolated you are, the more in the mix of socialization, the less disconnected that you feel. All of that makes sense. I think my favorite part of this study, though, is this next slide, and it's on employment. Basically, what it looked at is if somebody didn't have any issues conversing at all, 88% of them had been employed at some point in time during their early 20s. So they were looking at students with ASD in their early 20s, and those who had no trouble conversing, 88% of them had been employed at some point in time in their early 20s. We all know that if those conversational skills are inappropriate, that it can make other people feel uncomfortable. And so even if a student gets a job, it doesn't mean that he or she is going to maintain a job. And so I want to see all of the students that I work with have the conversational abilities to have back and forth conversations for friendship. But I also want to see them know the topics so that they know what's being discussed in class. And then have the skills to stay employed. I mean, that's a huge one. So what we're talking about today, it has real implication for success in life if we're to talk about connection with people, success with employment. All right, so why is the conversation framework needed? Well, we know that conversation can be very challenging for students and young adults and adults with ASD. Difficulties in communication can lead to social isolation, as I just said, but also social vulnerability. We see difficulty with employment and sometimes bullying. Sometimes kids are more protected in certain school systems than others or certain colleges than others, but bullying still does exist. It could be a virtual bullying.